Have you ever heard of a king blessed with unmatched wisdom, staggering wealth, and unrivaled power, yet brought down by his desires? This is the story of Solomon, the wisest and most prosperous ruler in biblical history. A man who had it all but lost everything because of one fatal flaw: women. God gifted Solomon with divine wisdom, making Israel a beacon of prosperity, wealth, and influence. Trade flourished, peace reigned, and his kingdom became the envy of the ancient world. But behind the splendor of his throne lay a dangerous secret: his harem of 1,000 women. Solomon's 700 wives and 300 concubines, from far-reaching lands like Egypt, Moab, and Sidon, were more than just companions. They were political pawns, cultural ambassadors, and ultimately, the seeds of his downfall. These unions, while solidifying alliances and filling his palace, brought foreign gods and practices into the heart of Israel, challenging its faith and corrupting Solomon's judgment. How did a man so wise succumb to such folly? Was it really his love for these women, or something deeper? In this video, we look deep into Solomon's rise, his remarkable legacy, and the tragic mistakes that led to his downfall. What happened after his death? Did his wisdom extend beyond the grave, or did his kingdom crumble without him? Join us as we unravel one of the Bible's most fascinating stories. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you won't miss any powerful insights into the incredible lives of biblical figures. This is the tale of Solomon, the man who ascended to unimaginable heights but was brought low by the weight of his own ambitions. From his rise as the chosen heir of David to his fall into idolatry, Solomon's life is a testament to the fragility of the human heart. It is a story of divine blessings squandered, of promises forgotten, and of wisdom that became clouded by the seduction of wealth, women, and worldly power. But the story of Solomon is not just about the past. It is a reflection of choices we all face. What happens when the pursuit of success overshadows the call of faith? How do we respond when the very blessings we prayed for begin to draw us away from the one who gave them? Solomon's life forces us to wrestle with these questions, not as distant observers, but as participants in the same human struggle. For his story, though ancient, is eerily familiar. What will we discover when we pull back the curtain on Solomon's life? Will we find inspiration in his wisdom, or will we learn caution from his failings? Will we marvel at his achievements, or will we tremble at the consequences of his compromises? Solomon's tale is more than history. It is a warning, a mirror, and a mystery waiting to be unraveled. And so we begin, not with the splendor of his temple, nor with the majesty of his throne, but with a man's heart, divided, searching, and ultimately led astray. King Solomon, one of the most significant figures in the Bible, is remembered as a man of unparalleled wisdom, immense wealth, and a reign that brought unprecedented prosperity to Israel. However, his life story is as complex as the legacy he left behind. To truly understand Solomon, we must examine his origins, lineage, and the events that shaped his life. Solomon was the son of King David and Bathsheba, making him part of a royal lineage that was both divinely appointed and marked by controversy. David, Solomon's father, was Israel's second king and a man after God's own heart, 1 Samuel 13:14. Despite his profound faith, David's reign was not without its flaws, and his relationship with Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, was born out of sin. David first encountered Bathsheba when she was the wife of Uriah, one of his loyal soldiers. Their adulterous affair led to Bathsheba's pregnancy, and David's subsequent orchestration of Uriah's death to cover up the scandal, 2 Samuel 11. This act displeased God, resulting in the death of their first child. However, after repentance and restoration, David and Bathsheba had another son, Solomon, whom God loved, 2 Samuel 24-25. Although Solomon was not David's eldest son, he was chosen by God to inherit the throne. This choice was significant because in ancient Near Eastern culture, succession usually followed the principle of primogeniture, favoring the eldest son. However, God's plans often defied human traditions. David had many sons, including Amnon, Absalom, and Adonijah, each of whom had their own claims to the throne. Amnon was killed by Absalom in revenge for a grievous crime, and Absalom later rebelled against David, but was ultimately defeated and killed, 2 Samuel 18. Adonijah, the next in line, attempted to declare himself king while David was on his deathbed. However, with the intervention of Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, David reaffirmed Solomon as his chosen successor, following God's will, 1 Kings 1. Solomon was likely born in Jerusalem during a time of relative stability in David's reign. As a young prince, he grew up witnessing the complexities of royal politics and the spiritual dynamics of his father's rule. David, in his final years, charged Solomon with the task of walking in God's ways, obeying his commands, and governing Israel justly, 1 Kings 2:1-4. Solomon's ascension to the throne was not without challenges. Adonijah's claim to the throne created tension, but Solomon quickly consolidated his power by addressing potential threats, including ordering the deaths of Adonijah and other rivals, 1 Kings 2:13-25. These actions, though harsh, were seen as necessary to secure his kingdom. Solomon's story begins not with his rise, but with a humble request. As a young man, he knew the weight of the crown he would soon wear, and instead of seeking power or wealth, he sought wisdom, a request that pleased God, who granted him not only unparalleled wisdom, but also riches, honor, and success beyond imagination. Solomon's early reign was a shining example of what it meant to be led by divine wisdom, a kingdom united in peace and a ruler admired by all. But as his wealth and influence grew, so did the temptations. It's almost as if the very blessings that God had given him began to cloud his vision. Solomon, who once prayed with humility and reverence, now began to surround himself with luxuries, foreign alliances, and idols. The very things that were meant to serve him, his wisdom, his power, began to serve his desires. Solomon's heart was slowly drawn away from the one true God, and with every compromise, his foundation cracked just a little bit more. Now I ask you, how many of us in moments of success have experienced a similar shift? Have you ever felt the weight of your achievements pulling you in directions you never imagined? How often do we, in our pursuit of success, lose sight of the values and principles that once guided us? It's not just Solomon's story. It's a story that plays out every day in the lives of leaders, families, and individuals. The rise to power, the accumulation of wealth, the allure of influence, all these things, though they may begin with noble intentions, can quickly become distractions that draw us away from what matters most. Think about the modern leaders who've risen to the top, politicians, business magnates, or even influencers in today's world. Their journeys often mirror Solomon's: initial success, admiration, and prosperity, followed by choices that undermine their integrity. What causes this? What happens when the very things that were meant to build us up start to build up our pride instead? For Solomon, it was the wisdom he received from God, a gift that should have kept him grounded, but instead became a double-edged sword. In today's world, we face the same dangers Solomon encountered. Many of us dream of success, hoping it will bring happiness and fulfillment. Yet, like Solomon, we often find ourselves at the crossroads of choice. What does it take to remain faithful, even when life's blessings are abundant? What does it mean to stay true to our values when everything around us screams for more? More wealth, more fame, more power. Solomon's rise to power was magnificent, but his fall is a reminder that the pursuit of more is a perilous path, one that can lead even the wisest astray. What's the lesson here? It's not the blessings that are the problem, but how we respond to them. Solomon didn't fail because he had wisdom, wealth, or influence. He failed because he allowed those very things to pull him away from his Creator. It's not about avoiding success, but ensuring that success does not become a barrier to faithfulness. Solomon's story teaches us that wisdom, while a great gift, must be continually aligned with the will of God. Wisdom is only as good as the heart that holds it, and when that heart becomes divided, even the greatest wisdom can lead us astray. Have you ever felt the weight of success pulling you down? What does it take to stay faithful amidst life's greatest blessings? God speaks to Solomon, offering him anything his heart desires. But Solomon, humble and wise beyond his years, asked for the one thing that would not only shape his reign, but also leave an indelible mark on history. Give your servant a discerning heart to govern your people and to distinguish between right and wrong. It is in this simple yet profound prayer that Solomon's story truly begins. And in response, God grants him the gift of wisdom, unlike any ruler before or after him. The heavens themselves seem to open as God's favor pours down upon the young king. But God's gift did not stop there. Along with wisdom, Solomon is promised wealth, honor, and a long life if he remains faithful to the Lord's commands. This moment is the dawn of a golden age for Israel, a king whose wisdom is both a divine gift and a tool for restoration. Solomon's rise is marked by the Ark of the Covenant being brought into Jerusalem, signaling not just the political, but the spiritual heart of the nation. As the Ark is placed in the newly constructed temple, the very temple Solomon would build with his own hands, God's presence settles among the people. This is the beginning of a new chapter for Israel, one where Solomon's wisdom would serve as the foundation for the nation's prosperity. But it was not just his wisdom that made Solomon's reign legendary. It was his ability to act with integrity, to judge with fairness, and to lead with compassion. One of the first tests of Solomon's wisdom came in a case that would echo through history. Two women, both claiming to be the mother of the same child, stand before him. The situation seems impossible, the stakes higher than any judge could imagine. But Solomon, in a moment of divine clarity, proposes a solution that stuns the court. "Cut the child in two," he commands, "and give each woman half." At this, the true mother immediately reveals herself, crying out to spare the child's life. Solomon's wisdom, both divine and practical, is revealed to the people, and Israel's trust in their king grows. It is through moments like these that Solomon's fame spreads beyond the borders of Israel. Kings and queens from distant lands, from as far as Sheba, hear of his wisdom and come seeking his counsel. Solomon has become a symbol of what can be achieved when wisdom and faith come together. Yet as the praises of men grow louder, a quiet danger begins to stir in Solomon's heart. For wisdom, as we know, is only as strong as the foundation it rests upon. Solomon's reign marks the pinnacle of Israel's prosperity and influence, a golden age that shines across the pages of history. His wisdom became legendary, spreading far beyond the borders of his kingdom. He wrote countless proverbs, imparting divine insight that would last through the ages. His knowledge of the world around him was unparalleled, and he understood the intricate design of nature itself. Solomon observed the patterns of the sun and the seasons, the behavior of animals, the flow of rivers, and in all these things, he saw the hand of God at work. His wisdom was not confined to the courts of Israel, but extended to every aspect of creation, and the nations took notice. Solomon did not only govern his people with wisdom, he taught it. The great halls of his palace were filled with students and scholars, all eager to learn from the king, whose understanding surpassed that of any ruler before him. His words were carefully chosen, his decisions guided by a profound sense of justice. The Proverbs, filled with timeless truths, became a source of guidance for generations. He spoke with clarity about the human heart, about the wisdom that comes from fearing the Lord, and about the way of life that leads to peace and fulfillment. Nations far and wide heard of Solomon's wisdom, and they came seeking his counsel. His fame grew, and so did the splendor of his kingdom. But it was not only his wisdom that defined this era, it was the unprecedented wealth and alliances he forged. Solomon's reign was marked by peace, and in this peace he turned his attention to the grandest project Israel had ever seen, the Temple of the Lord, a place where God himself would dwell among his people. The construction of the temple began with the careful selection of the finest materials: cedar from Lebanon, gold from Ophir, and stone quarried with precision. Workers, artisans, and laborers worked tirelessly to create a structure that would honor God in every way. The interior gleamed with gold, the floors were paved with precious stones, and every detail of the design was crafted according to God's instructions. The Ark of the Covenant, the symbol of God's presence with his people, was brought into the temple and placed within the Holy of Holies. As the Ark was placed in its rightful place, the glory of the Lord filled the temple, a tangible reminder of God's faithfulness to his people. This was more than just a building. It was a physical manifestation of God's promise to dwell with his people. And as the temple stood, the nation stood united, proud of their king, their faith, and the tangible sign of their relationship with the Almighty. But even as Israel flourished under Solomon's reign, the nations looked on with awe. One of the most powerful testimonies to Solomon's wealth and wisdom came from the Queen of Sheba. She traveled from her distant kingdom to see for herself the grandeur of Solomon's court and to hear his wisdom firsthand. When she arrived in Jerusalem, she was overwhelmed by the splendor, the opulence of the palace, the majesty of the temple, and the wisdom that flowed from Solomon's lips. She exclaimed, "The report I heard in my own country about your achievements and your wisdom is true. But I did not believe these things until I came and saw with my own eyes." She gave Solomon gifts of gold and spices, recognizing the extraordinary nature of his reign. Solomon's influence reached far and wide, and his wealth was unmatched by any other ruler in the ancient world. The Queen of Sheba's visit was a symbol of the recognition Solomon's reign had garnered. Israel was no longer a small, isolated nation. It was a kingdom of influence, and Solomon was the heart of it all. With wealth, wisdom, and divine favor, Solomon built not only a kingdom, but a legacy that would be remembered for generations. The temple stood as the pinnacle of this achievement, a place where Israel could meet with their God, and a reminder of the wisdom that had built the nation. Yet as with all golden ages, the question remains, how long could this prosperity last? What happens when a kingdom built on wisdom and faith begins to face the seductions of power and materialism? The story of Solomon's reign is not just one of triumph, but of the quiet dangers that lurk when blessings are not carefully guarded. As the years passed, Solomon's reign, once marked by wisdom and peace, began to show signs of a more subtle, yet dangerous shift. It began with compromises, small, seemingly insignificant choices that would ultimately set the stage for his downfall. Solomon, the wise king who had built a nation, now found himself entangled in the very web of excess that had once threatened others. The lavish banquets that once symbolized the prosperity of his kingdom became moments of indulgence, fueled by the presence of foreign wives, each one bringing her own culture, her own gods into Solomon's court. Solomon's heart, once devoted to the Lord, was now being pulled in many directions. With 700 wives and 300 concubines, his relationships were not just political alliances, they were alliances to foreign gods. And as Solomon grew older, his loyalty began to waver. The king who had once built the temple to honor the one true God now found himself, through the influence of his wives, building shrines and altars to foreign deities: Ashtoreth, Moloch, Chemosh. These gods, who represented everything contrary to the covenant Israel had with the Lord, began to infiltrate Solomon's life and kingdom. In the early days of his reign, Solomon had been a model of devotion, seeking God's will and establishing a kingdom of justice. But now he stood at a crossroads. The wisdom he had once used to guide his people was now clouded by the very pleasures and powers he had sought to control. His decisions, which once reflected a desire to honor God, now reflected a divided heart. The once glorious temple, the symbol of God's presence, now stood in stark contrast to the pagan altars being erected on the hills around Jerusalem. Solomon had begun to compromise, and in compromise, the seeds of division were planted. The people who had once admired Solomon's leadership began to feel the weight of his decisions. Forced labor to build grand structures, taxes to support an ever-expanding empire, and the rising influence of foreign gods all began to take their toll. Solomon, now an older and conflicted king, found himself hearing the complaints of his people, who no longer felt the same sense of peace and prosperity that had marked the early years of his reign. The same wisdom that had built the kingdom was now being called into question. The lavish lifestyle Solomon once enjoyed now seemed to come at the expense of his people's well-being. But the most painful shift came in Solomon's own heart. As God had warned him in his youth, the influence of foreign wives began to lead him away from the path of righteousness. His wives turned his heart after other gods, in 1 Kings 11:4, and in that moment, Solomon's legacy of devotion to the Lord began to unravel. What had once been a kingdom built on wisdom, faith, and unity was now teetering on the edge of division and destruction. The Lord's anger burned against Solomon. God had given him everything: wisdom, wealth, peace, and influence. But in the end, It was his divided heart that led him astray, and the consequences of this shift would ripple through his family, his kingdom, and the generations to come. Solomon's decline was not a sudden fall, but a slow unraveling. His heart, once filled with the wisdom of God, was now consumed with pride and indulgence. As his reign drew to a close, the signs of his failure became undeniable. The kingdom, once united under the banner of divine wisdom and peace, was on the brink of division. Solomon, who had once prayed for discernment to lead God's people, now found himself caught in the grip of his own mistakes. And as the Lord had warned, the consequences were inevitable. God, in his mercy, sent the prophet Ahijah to deliver a message of judgment. Ahijah, with his prophetic mantle, tore his cloak into 12 pieces. He handed 10 pieces to Jeroboam, one of Solomon's servants, and prophesied the division of the kingdom. The Lord says,
I will most certainly tear the kingdom away from you and give it to one of your subordinates.
1 Kings 11:11. This was the beginning of the end, a divided kingdom, a fractured people, and a shattered legacy. Solomon, now an older man, sat alone in his palace, surrounded by the very idols that had led him astray. His once vibrant faith had dimmed, and the wisdom that had built the nation seemed lost. He gazed at the shrines and altars to foreign gods, his hands trembling as he realized the full weight of his choices. His heart, once devoted to the Lord, was now filled with regret. The man who had built a temple for God now found himself worshiping the very gods that had caused Israel's downfall in the past. His legacy of wisdom had been overshadowed by his pursuit of pleasure, his alliances, and his own divided heart. And with his death, the kingdom began to unravel. Solomon's son Rehoboam ascended to the throne, but his leadership lacked the wisdom and compassion of his father. When the people of Israel came to him, asking for lighter burdens and relief from the heavy taxes and forced labor Solomon had imposed, Rehoboam, instead of listening to the wise counsel of the elders, turned to his younger advisors. Their response was harsh. My father scourged you with whips, but I will scourge you with scorpions. This harsh answer sparked rebellion, and 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel rebelled, breaking away to form their own kingdom under Jeroboam. The kingdom that Solomon had built, with all its wealth, wisdom, and influence, now stood divided. Israel and Judah were no longer united under one king. Rehoboam's harsh leadership had torn the nation apart, and the once glorious reign of Solomon had given way to a legacy of regret. The wisdom that had once been the hallmark of Solomon's rule had been lost to pride, and the kingdom he had carefully constructed was now a fractured shadow of what it had been. In the end, Solomon's story is a tragic reminder of how even the wisest can fall when they lose sight of their devotion to God. His life began with a humble prayer for wisdom, but it ended in a kingdom torn apart by pride, idolatry, and division. His story is one of the dangers of wealth, power, and success without a firm foundation in the Lord. And as Israel descended into chaos after his death, the consequences of Solomon's choices echoed across the generations. The story of Solomon, from his rise to his tragic fall, offers us a profound lesson that transcends time. It is a story that resonates with anyone who has ever faced success, wealth, or power, yet struggled to keep their heart pure. Solomon was the epitome of wisdom and prosperity, and yet his downfall teaches us that wisdom alone is not enough. True wisdom begins with a humble, unwavering devotion to God, a commitment to keep Him at the center of our lives, no matter how high we rise. As we look at Solomon's life, we are reminded that the blessings of success can sometimes blind us. When we are blessed with influence, power, and wealth, it is easy to become complacent or self-sufficient, believing that we no longer need God's guidance. But the same wisdom that once led Solomon to greatness became clouded by his pride, his unfaithfulness, and his desire for comfort and pleasure. His story is a powerful warning that no one is immune to the dangers of pride, even the wisest among us. We see similar patterns in the lives of leaders today. Those who rise to the top only to find their downfall tied to their own compromises. Whether in the political realm, business, or even in our personal lives, the same temptations that led Solomon astray continue to affect us. The allure of power, wealth, and the pursuit of personal pleasure can draw us away from the simple truth.
The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom.
Proverbs 9:10. Solomon's later writings in Ecclesiastes reflect the emptiness he felt as he reached the peak of his achievements and then saw it all crumble. In the book, Solomon searches for meaning in wealth, work, pleasure, and wisdom, but he concludes that without God, all of it is meaningless. He writes, "Now all has been heard.
Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is the duty of all mankind."
Ecclesiastes 12:13. His final words, echoing the same wisdom that first brought him to prominence, remind us that no matter how much we accomplish, the true purpose of life is found in our relationship with God. Solomon's story is not just one of failure, but a cautionary tale of what happens when we forget the foundation of wisdom, faithfulness to God. What legacy will you leave behind? Will it be a legacy built on the fear of the Lord and devotion to His commands, or one clouded by pride, idolatry, and regret? The choice is ours to make. Let Solomon's life be a reminder to us all. Stay faithful in success and humble in failure. For true wisdom is not in our achievements, but in our dependence on the one who gave us life in the first place. True wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord. What legacy will you leave behind? A reminder to stay faithful in success and humble in failure. As we close the story of Solomon, it's time for you, the viewer, to reflect on what you've heard today. Solomon's life is one of great wisdom, but also great failure. We've seen how the pursuit of wealth, power, and pleasure can cloud even the clearest of minds. Now, I want to ask you, what do you think was Solomon's greatest mistake? Was it his many marriages, his indulgence in luxury, or perhaps his divided heart towards God? And what about us today? How can we guard ourselves against the same pitfalls that Solomon fell into? In a world where success often brings pressure to compromise, how can we stay grounded and faithful to the Lord in all that we do? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your reflections and lessons in the comments below, and let's continue this conversation together. What resonated most with you in Solomon's journey? If you found this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, where we go deeper into more Bible stories that offer powerful lessons for our everyday lives. Thank you.